At exactly 2:47 p.m. on a cold Wednesday afternoon, FBI Director Kash Patel walked into the congressional hearing room like a man who had never been challenged in his life. Behind him trailed his security detail and a small army of legal advisors, their faces grim with the knowledge of what was coming. The mahogany-paneled chamber buzzed with the energy of reporters who sensed blood in the water, cameras focused and ready to capture what would become one of the most devastating congressional confrontations in FBI history. Patel adjusted his navy tie, straightened his shoulders, and took his seat at the witness table, with the confidence of someone who believed his badge made him untouchable. He had no idea that in less than 43 minutes, his career would be hanging by a thread, destroyed not by partisan politics or media spin, but by the simple, devastating power of truth spoken by a senator who refused to let injustice slide. Senator Peter Welch sat across from him, a man carved from Vermont granite and principle, his weathered hands resting calmly on a thick manila folder that contained enough evidence to end Patel's FBI directorship. The contrast was Sirk Patel, young and arrogant, representing everything wrong with Washington's culture of impunity, and Welch, seasoned and steady, embodying the accountability that democracy demanded. Between them sat the ghost of Brian Driscoll, an 18-year FBI veteran whose firing had become the symbol of everything broken in Patel's FBI. What Patel didn't know was that Welch had spent weeks preparing for this moment, gathering testimony, flight records, personnel files, and witness statements that would strip away every lie and excuse the FBI director had constructed around Driscoll's termination. The hearing began routinely enough, with Patel offering the usual platitudes about FBI excellence and national security priorities. His voice carried that practiced smoothness of a man accustomed to congressional theater, each word calculated to project strength and competence. But Welch had no interest in performance. When his time came to question the director, the Vermont senator's first words cut through the pretense like a blade through silk. "Director Patel," he began, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of moral authority. "Let's talk about Brian Driscoll." The name hung in the air between them, and for just a moment, Patel's confident mask slipped, his jaw tightened, his hands clenched slightly on the table, and the cameras caught every micro-expression of discomfort that crossed his face. Welch opened the manila folder with deliberate precision, each movement calculated to build tension in the room. The papers inside weren't just documents, they were the career of a man who had dedicated his life to serving his country, only to be discarded by a director more interested in political loyalty than professional excellence. "You know who Brian Driscoll is, don't you, Director?" Welch asked, though both men knew the answer. Patel straightened, trying to regain his composure, and answered with forced casualness, "Yes, I'm familiar with former Special Agent Driscoll." The word former landed like a slap, a reminder of the destruction Patel had wrought with a single termination decision. What followed was a masterclass in congressional oversight, as Welch methodically laid out Driscoll's career with the precision of a prosecutor building an ironclad case. 18 years of service to the FBI, Welch began, his voice growing stronger with each fact. Special agent in charge of the Newark office, commander of the FBI's hostage rescue team, one of the most prestigious and dangerous positions in federal law enforcement. Each achievement was a nail in the coffin of Patel's credibility, because how do you justify firing someone whose record read like a textbook example of FBI excellence? The room grew quieter as Welch continued, the weight of Driscoll's service record creating an almost sacred atmosphere that made Patel's fidgeting seem even more pronounced. "Section Chief of the Critical Incident Response Group's Tactical Section," Welch continued, never taking his eyes off Patel, "overseeing 55 SWAT teams, the elite of the elite. Director, these are the men and women who go into the most dangerous situations to protect American lives." Patel could only nod weakly, each acknowledgement further undermining any justification for Driscoll's termination. The senator was building to something, and everyone in the room could feel it, the crescendo that would expose just how personal and political Driscoll's firing had truly been. Then Welch dropped the bombshell that would define the entire hearing, the Medal of Valor. "Director Patel, are you aware that Brian Driscoll received the Medal of Valor for his participation in the raid that took down ISIS terrorist Abu Sayyaf, who had kidnapped American humanitarian Kayla Mueller. The question hit Patel like a physical blow, his face draining of color, as he realized the full scope of what Welch was revealing. This wasn't just any FBI agent. This was a genuine American hero. Someone who had risked his life to save kidnapped Americans, and had been rewarded with the FBI's highest honor for bravery. The contrast between Driscoll's service and his ultimate fate became starkly, devastatingly clear. Patel tried to recover, muttering something about not having all the details. But Welch was relentless. He also led the team that neutralized Kurt Meyer, a barricaded subject who had killed 4 people and wounded 2 more in a bar shooting. Agent Driscoll and his team went in and ended that threat, saving countless lives. Each heroic act, Welch described, made Driscoll's firing seem more incomprehensible, more cruel, and more obviously motivated by factors that had nothing to do with job performance or professional competence. The man Patel had dismissed was not just competent, he was exceptional, a decorated veteran whose record spoke to everything the FBI claimed to value. But Welch wasn't done building his case. He leaned forward slightly, his voice taking on the tone of a prosecutor about to deliver a killing blow. Director Patel, do you agree with me that a supervisor who stands up for his subordinates when they've done the job asked of them is a stand-up person, someone to be admired? It was a trap, beautifully constructed and impossible to escape. Patel had to agree. Who could argue against loyalty and integrity in leadership? Generally speaking. Yes, sir, Patel answered, not seeing the noose tightening around his neck. Then explain to me, Welch said, his voice rising just enough to cut through the chamber's tension, why Brian Driscoll was terminated. Because according to my information, he got into trouble for one reason: standing up for FBI agents under his command, who had investigated January 6th, agents who did exactly what they were assigned to do, and who your administration then targeted for political reasons. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot, clear and unmistakable in its implications. Patel had fired a decorated hero, not for failure, but for integrity, for having the courage to protect his people when they came under political pressure. Patel's defense crumbled in real time, visible to everyone watching. His usual confidence evaporated, replaced by the stammering evasions of a man caught in his own contradictions. That matter is under litigation, he managed weakly, but Welch cut through the legal smokescreen with surgical precision. Let's keep this narrow, Director. Was Brian Driscoll fired? The simple question demanded a simple answer, and Patel's attempts to deflect only made him look more guilty. Yes, he was terminated, Patel finally admitted, the words seeming to cause him physical pain. And who delivered that termination notice? Welch pressed, though both men knew the answer. That's my job, Patel replied. And suddenly the full scope of his cruelty became clear. This wasn't some administrative decision made by subordinates, this was personal. Kash Patel had looked a Medal of Valor recipient in the eye, and destroyed his career, not for any failure or misconduct, but for the crime of loyalty to his fellow agents. The image was devastating: a political appointee, who had never worn a badge or kicked down a door, sitting in judgment of a man who had spent 2 decades risking his life for his country. Welch's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but in the silent chamber, every word carried like thunder. Director Patel, I'm looking at a record that suggests this man deserved consideration for the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and you fired him. Help me understand the justice in that. It wasn't really a question. It was an indictment, delivered with the quiet moral authority that only comes from being completely unassailably right. Patel tried to mumble something about other information and pending litigation, but the damage was done. In the court of public opinion, he had just admitted to destroying an American hero's career for political reasons. The chamber erupted in ways that congressional hearings rarely do. Reporters frantically typed updates that would be online within minutes. Twitter exploded with hashtags like "Justice for Driscoll" and "Patel must go." Cable news networks broke into regular programming with breaking news banners that would dominate coverage for days. But perhaps most telling was the silence from Patel's own supporters. The Republican members of the committee, who might normally rush to defend an FBI director, found themselves unable to justify the unjustifiable. How do you defend firing a Medal of Valor recipient for protecting his subordinates? As the hearing continued, Welch pressed his advantage with the skill of a master prosecutor. He had more evidence, more questions, more contradictions to expose. But the central point had already been made with devastating clarity. Kash Patel represented everything wrong with politicized law enforcement, willing to destroy careers and reputations in service of partisan loyalty rather than justice. Brian Driscoll represented everything right with American law enforcement courage, competence, and integrity, even when it came at personal cost. The aftermath was swift and merciless. Within hours, former FBI agents were flooding social media with stories of their own experiences with Patel's politicization of the Bureau. Driscoll himself, who had maintained dignified silence throughout his legal battle, issued a statement through his attorney, expressing gratitude to Senator Welch for speaking truth to power and standing up for the men and women who put their lives on the line every day. The statement went viral within hours, shared by law enforcement officers across the country, who recognized their own struggles in Driscoll's story. Editorial boards across the political spectrum, from the Washington Post to the Wall Street Journal, called for Patel's resignation. The New York Times ran a devastating investigative piece, detailing other questionable terminations under Patel's leadership, painting a picture of an FBI director more interested in political loyalty tests than professional competence. Even conservative commentators, typically supportive of tough law enforcement leadership, found themselves unable to defend the firing of a decorated agent for the crime of loyalty to his subordinates. Perhaps most damaging was the response from within the FBI itself. Active agents, speaking anonymously to reporters, described a climate of fear and political intimidation that had become pervasive under Patel's leadership. The FBI Agents Association, typically reluctant to criticize Bureau leadership publicly, issued a carefully worded statement expressing concerns about recent personnel decisions that appear to prioritize political considerations over professional merit and service records. It was bureaucratic language, but the message was clear: the rank and file had lost confidence in their director. The legal implications were equally severe. Driscoll's attorneys immediately filed additional motions in his wrongful termination lawsuit, citing Patel's congressional testimony as evidence of political motivation. Legal experts suggested that Patel's admissions under oath had significantly strengthened Driscoll's case and might expose the FBI to additional liability for political retaliation. The Justice Department's Inspector General announced a formal investigation into FBI personnel practices under Patel's leadership, focusing specifically on whether political considerations had influenced termination decisions. But beyond the legal and political ramifications, Welch had accomplished something more important. He had reminded the country what accountability looked like. In an era of partisan stonewalling and deflection, he had demonstrated that simple, direct questions backed by indisputable facts could still expose the truth. He had shown that moral authority didn't come from party affiliation or political power, but from the willingness to stand up for what was right, regardless of the political cost. The contrast between the two men had been stark and telling. Welch, calm and principled, speaking for every American who believed in fairness and justice; Patel, defensive and evasive, representing a system that had lost sight of its core values. What made the moment even more powerful was the visible shock rippling through the gallery behind Patel, where FBI agents who had worked with Driscoll sat in stunned silence, many with tears in their eyes as Welch recounted their former colleagues' heroic service. Several committee members later reported seeing Patel's hands trembling as Welch detailed how Driscoll had personally saved the lives of 3 hostages during a 2018 operation in Detroit, a detail that somehow made his termination even more unconscionable. The chamber's atmosphere had shifted from routine oversight to something approaching a wake for American justice itself. It was a moment that transcended politics, touching something deeper about the kind of country America aspired to be: a place where heroes like Brian Driscoll are honored, not punished, and where leaders are held accountable for their actions. As the hearing concluded, and Patel left the chamber, his confident stride replaced by a hurried shuffle, it was clear that something fundamental had shifted. The man who had entered, believing himself untouchable, had been exposed as just another political appointee drunk on power and willing to abuse it. Senator Welch had done more than ask questions. He had reminded America that in a democracy, no one is above accountability, and that sometimes all it takes is one person, willing to speak truth to power, to bring down even the most arrogant and seemingly untouchable officials. The story of Brian Driscoll became a symbol of something larger: the struggle between integrity and politics, between service and self-interest, between the America we aspire to be and the America we sometimes become when we lose sight of our values. And in the end, thanks to Senator Welch's relentless pursuit of truth, integrity won. As for Kash Patel, his time at the FBI would be remembered, not for any achievements in law enforcement, but for the decorated hero he destroyed, and the senator who held him accountable for it. Sometimes the strongest weapon isn't a badge or a gun, it's truth, spoken by someone with the courage to use it. Senator Welch had that courage, and America was better for it.